All right, for those of you just joining us, this is our CCA Emerging Leaders Interview Series. My name is Michael Clark, President of the Conference of Consulting Actuaries and Managing Director at River Mercantile. We have the pleasure today of hearing from John Lowell, partner at October 3 in Atlanta, Georgia, and former President of the Conference of Consulting Actuaries. John, for the next few questions, I actually want to talk a little bit about what we just wrapped up talking about why you became an actuary. So I think you've answered why you became an actuary. It sounds like it was out of necessity. Thinking about your actuarial career, everyone has their professional triumphs that they look back on and are proud of. Can you share with us maybe one or two of your professional triumphs that you're most proud
of? Sure. One of them, and not just because this happens to be an interview sponsored by the Conference of Consulting Actuaries, but frankly, becoming president of the conference was, for me, a big professional success. I didn't get involved in really active volunteering until, I guess, as I said, until about 2004. And, I found out at the time that I started volunteering on the EA Meeting Program Committee, I was not a member of the conference yet. Keith Stewart, who some of you may know, who used to be one of the key staff people at the conference, kept harassing me and said, you need to join, you need to join, you need to join. And I finally found an excuse to join, or I ran out of excuses to not join, and I became a member of the CCA. And I really, really liked working with the staff. I liked working with the other volunteers. And so I sought ways to get more involved. So that was, it was something that I really wanted to do. This has been a very good organization for me, and I wanted to give back. And so reaching that point was both rewarding and very satisfying for me. Another big success for me, I talked earlier about how I was suddenly put into a sales role and had no idea what it meant to sell, how you sold, what was a success, what was a failure. And so the first, what I would consider real success that I had, and I view it as kind of one of my more interesting stories in that regard, I was in the city of Columbus, Georgia, where by that point I had a client, and I was presenting their annual valuation results to them. It was the first time I was doing that. And I had asked them in advance how much time they usually set aside for that meeting. And they said 4 to 6 hours. Now I have no idea, or I had no idea at the time if 4 to 6 hours was long, short, or otherwise. But I planned for a 4 to 6 hour meeting. One of the other things, just as a preface to this, is I had told you earlier that I always carried around in my briefcase a little sheet of paper that had a list of all the companies in town that I might call on. So I went to this valuation meeting, and sure enough, as you might have expected, it didn't take 4 to 6 hours. It only took about 2 hours. But my drive to Columbus had been 2 hours, and I had 2 hours back. So I figured, well, I planned on spending the whole day there. I might as well spend the whole day. So I walked across the street. It was kind of a main road to a Hardee's fast food restaurant. Reason I did that is this was the early 90s and I didn't have a cell phone yet. So I figured Hardee's probably had a payphone. I looked in my briefcase, found that list, picked a company somewhat at random, and put a quarter in the payphone and called the company. And I asked if I could speak with their benefits manager, and they first thing they said was, well, we're not hiring. And I said, well, I'm not looking for a job. That's okay. Can I speak with your benefits manager? Well, she's new. That's okay. Could you tell me what her name is and put me through to her? So they did. And I told her who I was and why I was, why I was calling. And I asked her, I said, when I'm in town, would it be okay if I stop by? And she said, sure. When do you think you might be here? And I said, in 10 minutes if I don't get lost. So after she picked her jaw up off the floor, I did drive on over there. It took me a little bit more than 10 minutes. And when I walked in, we made small talk for a little while. She was new, which turned out to be helpful. And I left with a paying project. And the fact that on my first call of that type, I left with a paying project, that's certainly one of my most unforgettable highlights of my career.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. And everyone, I think, would wish for that type of experience. So I can understand why that would be memorable. So thanks for sharing those triumphs with us. I'll maybe flip to the other side of the coin here and ask you, what do you wish you had done differently with your career?
You know, part of this, Michael, I think is based on the people that I've worked with over time. Certainly there are the actuaries. One of the things I wish I had done differently, but circumstances kind of prevented me from doing it. I wish I had gotten my FSA before I had kids. Once I had kids and started having client responsibilities, now remember, when I accepted my first actuarial job, as it turned out, not only did I not have any exams behind me, I didn't even know I had to take any. So I really, you know, and I had kids coming shortly thereafter. It turned out that my wife was in labor with twins when I took parts 1 and 2. I took part 1, left the room as soon as they would let me, drove back to the hospital. The nurse said she's probably not going to deliver anytime soon. So I felt comfortable then eating lunch, going back to the exam site, rushing through that one, and then going back to eventually see my twins born, one very, very late that night and the other one very, very early the next morning. But yeah, so I wish I had gotten my FSA. And frankly, I wish I had gotten my FSA before I had kids, but neither one of those happened. But then also, because I've worked over time with people who have law degrees, many of whom practice law, if I had it to do all over again, it's hard to tell, but there's something in me that says I would like to have, whether or not I ever practiced law, I would kind of like to have a law degree. If I lived in a state where I could do it, I would consider going and preparing for it myself and taking the bar exam to become a member of the bar, whether or not I had a law degree. In this state, though, you have to have one in order to join the bar, so that's kind of a non-issue. I also, because I've seen how valued they are sometimes, even if perhaps they shouldn't be, I kind of wish I had an MBA as well. So the trick is I would have liked to have somehow, while I was teaching college math, gotten a law degree and an MBA, just while I had nothing else to do.
Yeah. Interesting. We did have one question come in from the people on the call today, and for those of you who use the Q&A panel, you can submit questions. We'll get to as many of those as we can. But going back to what we were talking about in the last segment about being pushed into different roles and to use your words, preparing for the roles that maybe you didn't necessarily want but could see yourself potentially getting. Do you have an example of a role that you really didn't want that you prepared for? And if you do, did you end up finding that you were correct, that you really didn't want it, or did you find that over time you were able to adapt to it and it actually became something you want more of?
I don't think I've ever had a new role in this profession that, certainly in retrospect, that I didn't want or had no reason to want. Each of the roles I've taken on, even those that I've gotten out of, I'm still really learning how to do. Some of them I've made more progress on than others. There are none in particular that I've felt like in retrospect I couldn't do. I don't know. You know, in terms of preparing for them, though, it's just always been reading, learning, asking questions. Back, you know, another example of how I might have done this that's probably a little bit different from what most other people would do, and there are words that I'm not going to put on the webcast that people might attribute to the behaviors I exhibited when I did this. But going back again to the very late 80s or very, very early 90s, if I was a little bit short on work, I would go around the office to principals in the office in our practice, and I would ask them if they had anything on their plates that they wanted to or needed to get rid of. And almost without exception, it didn't matter what they said that they had that they wanted to or needed to get rid of. It didn't matter if it was a topic I knew nothing about. My response would be, great, I can do that for you. And it would always be, can we talk about it in the morning? The reason was, in our office, we had a library. It had physical books, and there were great resources on lots of topics. And once I accepted the opportunity to do something, I would go down to the library and find as many resources as I could and bring them home with me that night. And the next morning when I came in, I knew enough that I could talk about that topic. And it gave me the opportunity to be kind of the special project guy at my level. I was the one who, because I asked for it, did all the stuff that a lot of other people thought were just kind of cool projects. So it was my way to get exposure to lots of different things. And therefore, when I was thrust into a role I wasn't used to, well, I was used to being thrust into roles I wasn't used to. And so it made the transition a little bit easier for me, I think.
Excellent. We had another question come in too along the lines of taking exams and having kids. What advice do you have if people are in a similar situation to what you found yourself in, where they're having to take exams and they have kids at home? How do you make that work?
Study better than I did. I never made my studying a top priority. It's not who I am. So I always put my family ahead of studying. I put my clients ahead of studying. I don't advise that for people. I walked into a number of exams having studied the day before, and that's not always a good way to achieve success. So frankly, while whoever asked the question, I would love to give you great advice on how you study or how you study with kids, I'm the wrong person to ask. Whatever it is that I did, do the opposite. But for those of you who do have kids and who are taking exams, I am hoping that you have a very supportive spouse or significant other who's in your life, and in being supportive, that they can understand that you do need to dedicate a fair amount of time. It's in your long-term best interests, and hopefully it's in their long-term best interests and your kids' long-term best interests for you to put the necessary time into studying and to be able to prepare for exams. As I said, I didn't do that. And in this, in this profession in particular, that's one of my regrets, although it took me a long time to realize it, is that I didn't make it a high enough priority, or couldn't make it a high enough priority, depending on how I look at it, to be able to finish up my exams.
No, that's excellent advice.